Potter story from another's perspective. Rowan Barrows and the Forgotten Prophecy. Chapter 4, The Expected Letter. The next morning broke cool and clear, sunlight spilling through the small windows of Mr. Barrows' house as Rowan shoved the last of his things into his kit bag. "Train leaves in 20 minutes, his father said around a mouthful of breakfast. "Puck, stop trying to pack for him. He can manage on his own." "Puck is only helping," the house elf squeaked indignantly, attempting to fold Rowan's jumper into a square the size of a handkerchief. Rowan laughed, snatched the jumper back before it disappeared forever into Puck's idea of tidy, and slung his bag over his shoulder. Outside, the air smelled faintly of wet grass. His father walked him as far as the station, a quiet stretch of road that led past the river where mist still clung to the water. "Play hard at your next match," his father said, clapping Rowan on the shoulder as the train whistle sounded in the distance. "And keep practicing. Don't let those wyverns think they've scared you off." Rowan nodded, grinning, before climbing aboard the nearly empty train. He leaned out of the window as it pulled away, watching his father shrink to a speck on the platform, one hand raised in farewell. The journey home felt longer than the one out, though the sun climbed higher with every mile. Rowan's thoughts wandered, Quidditch, Hogwarts, the pale-haired man with the cane, until the train finally hissed to a stop at the tiny station closest to Mossfield Way. Rowan shouldered his kit bag and set off up the road, already picturing the familiar red-bricked house waiting at the end of the street. He didn't expect to find his mother standing in the front garden, arms folded, looking like she couldn't decide whether to be annoyed or excited, and he definitely didn't expect to see the owl. It was perched on the garden gate, a large, handsome, tawny owl with a letter clamped firmly in its beak. It looked directly at Rowan as he walked up the path, then stuck out its leg as though it had been waiting there all morning. Rowan stared, then stared some more. "About time you got back," Mrs. Ashford said, nodding at the owl like it was an unwanted salesman. "It hasn't moved an inch since it got here." Rowan untied the letter with fingers that felt strangely clumsy. The heavy parchment crackled softly in the summer air. There was no mistaking the emerald green ink. Rowan turned the envelope over in his hands. His name was written in the same elegant green script that had addressed so many others before him. Mr. R. Barrows, second bedroom on the right, 22 Mossfield Way, Devon. His heart thumped strangely as he broke the seal. He already knew what it would say. Of course he did. But seeing the thick parchment and the curling letters made it feel different. Real. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He could practically hear it in a deep booming voice as he read through the lines about term dates and school robes and a long list of books with names like A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration. He looked up, grinning, and stopped. Mrs. Ashford was watching him, arms folded, her face giving nothing away. "Well," she said after a moment. "There it is then," Rowan blinked. "Mum, it's Hogwarts." "I can read, Rowan," she said calmly, taking the letter when he held it out. She read it once, carefully, then folded it again. "Don't get excited yet. I haven't decided if you'll be going." Rowan stared at her. "Haven't decided? Mum, you have to decide. It's Hogwarts." Mrs. Ashford set the letter on the kitchen table, her expression unreadable. "It's a school, Rowan. A school for witches and wizards, yes, but don't think for a second that makes it special enough to stop me worrying. Your father might think all this is wonderful, but he's not the one raising you, is he?" Rowan opened his mouth, then shut it again. Her voice hadn't risen once. That somehow made it worse. "We'll talk about it later," she said simply, turning away to fill the kettle. "Go and unpack your things." Rowan trudged upstairs, the letter clutched in his hand. For the first time since he'd seen the owl on the gate, he didn't feel quite so excited anymore. Rowan went upstairs to put his things away, but he could still hear the low murmur of voices downstairs, his mother clattering mugs a little louder than she needed to, the creak of the kettle settling on its hook. Rowan had known about Hogwarts for as long as he could remember. Not in the way you know about places you've never seen, not like distant countries on a map, but in the way you know about somewhere that belongs to your family, somewhere spoken about in half-finished stories at the dinner table, somewhere that lives in old photographs and in the way someone's eyes light up when they remember. His grandmother had gone there, his father had gone there. Even Uncle Corvin, who was rarely spoken of, had walked its corridors. Hogwarts, you see, was no ordinary school. It was the school for witches and wizards. The school, the place where children who could make strange things happen without meaning to, were sent to learn how to do it properly. How to light a wand instead of blowing up a light bulb. How to stir a potion without setting the house on fire. And it was, as far as anyone in the magical world was concerned, the finest magical school there was. Rowan had grown up on scraps of it, on tales of Quidditch matches, on stories of midnight feasts. He had always assumed, in the unquestioning way children assume things about their future, that one day he would go too. It had never occurred to him that he might not. Until now. When Rowan came back downstairs, the Hogwarts letter still clutched in his hand, Eleanor was in her armchair by the window, Candy the cat draped over her lap like an old blanket. She was gazing into the street as though she'd seen something interesting. "Gran," Rowan said carefully, holding out the letter. She looked up slowly, eyes bright but a little tired. "So," she said, her voice rasping like turning pages, "it's come at last." Rowan nodded, and something about the way he gripped the parchment made the corner of her mouth curl into a faint smile. "Your mum's not sure yet," she stated. "She says she hasn't decided," Rowan muttered. Eleanor snorted softly, a very unladylike sound for someone who still wore pearls. "She hasn't decided," she repeated, shaking her head, as though this sort of thing waits on permission. "Hogwarts doesn't ask, my boy. It invites." Rowan blinked at that. Eleanor smoothed Candy's ears with one hand, her thin fingers trailing through the cat's cream-coloured fur. "I remember when your father's letter came," she said, eyes glinting with some memory far away from this room. "He practically flew through the ceiling with excitement. Broke my best teacup when the owl dropped it in his porridge." "Gran," Rowan hesitated, "do you think she'll say yes?" Eleanor looked at him for a long time. So long Rowan began to fidget. Then she leaned forward, pressing the letter back into his hands. "Rowan Barrows," she said quietly, "Hogwarts has been waiting for you since the day you were born. Your mother can no more stop this than she can stop the sun rising tomorrow." Something in her tone made Rowan's chest feel lighter. Down in her lap, Candy yawned and stretched like he'd been listening the whole time. Rowan sat on the edge of his bed, the Hogwarts letter spread out across his knees. The emerald green writing glinted faintly in the lamplight like it knew something he didn't. He could hear his mother moving around in the kitchen, slow, steady, the way she always was when she was thinking too much about something. Eleanor had gone quiet in her armchair, knitting half a row before Candy stole the yarn and fell asleep on it. Rowan stared at the letter, his mind buzzing. If he didn't do something, she might say no. She might read the list of books and cauldrons and school robes and just decide it was all too much. He needed a plan, not a speech. He was rubbish at speeches, and not a fight. That never worked with Mum. Something else. And then it came to him. If she thought Hogwarts was dangerous, he'd show her he wasn't just some reckless kid who couldn't handle himself. If she thought he wasn't ready, he'd show her he was. He'd work harder than ever. He'd help with the gardening without being asked, run every errand without complaining. Make her see he could handle Hogwarts the same way he handled everything else, by rolling up his sleeves and getting on with it. Maybe then, when the time came to decide, she wouldn't be able to look at him, at the neat garden, the stacked woodpile, the tidy hedges, and say no. Rowan folded the Hogwarts letter carefully and set it on the bedside table. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow he'd start. The next morning Rowan was up before his mother. The house was quiet, blue with early light. He pulled on his jumper and slipped out the back door, Candy pattering after him on silent paws. The dew-soaked grass wet his cuffs as he headed to the greenhouse. The little glass house glowed faintly in the dawn, mist beading the panes. Inside, the air was warm and green. He checked the cucumbers first, leaves like floppy hands, then the tomatoes, tall and tangling toward the ceiling. He watered just enough, pinched out 2 cheeky side shoots. Rowan paused. A shaft of sunlight cut through the foggy glass, scattering dust and tiny midges into gold. For a heartbeat, the whole place felt attentive, like it was watching him back. He closed up, wiped his hands on his jeans and went to meet the day. Mrs. Ashford found him dragging a sack of compost toward the roses. "Morning," he said, a little out of breath. "Thought I'd get a head start." Mrs. Ashford raised her eyebrows but said nothing. Rowan spent the whole day like that. He weeded the garden till his knees ached, fetched tools before his mother asked for them, and even carried heavy crates down the lane for Mrs. Dawlish, who looked so surprised she gave him 3 chocolate biscuits in thanks. When Mrs. Perkins called over the hedge with the latest gossip, Rowan didn't even groan the way he usually did. He nodded politely, kept sweeping the path, and managed not to roll his eyes once while she went on about Mrs. Dawlish's cousin and the butcher's broken window. By the time the sun was slipping behind the rooftops, the gardens were neat enough for the neighbours to lean over their fences and comment. "Never seen the place looking so fine," old Mr. Griffith said, with a suspicious look at Rowan, as though hard work must be some sort of trick. Rowan only smiled faintly and kept raking the path, his back aching pleasantly. Mrs. Ashford watched from the doorway, arms folded, her expression as unreadable as ever. She didn't say a word about Hogwarts. Neither did Rowan. At the corner shop he ran in for milk and came out with change counted to the penny, not a single complaint about the weight of the bottles. Mrs. Ashford noticed, of course. She wasn't the sort of woman to miss things like her son suddenly turning into the world's most helpful assistant, but she didn't mention it, not even when Rowan polished the garden shears after supper, like it was the most natural thing in the world. By the end of the week, Rowan was running on little more than stubbornness and burnt toast. He had mowed lawns, stacked firewood, scrubbed flower pots, and delivered half the village's gossip while hauling baskets back and forth across Mossfield Way. His hands were nicked from rose thorns, his shoulders ached, and he had blistered the back of one heel carrying a heavy sack of soil up the lane. His mother hadn't said a word. Not when Mrs. Perkins commented on the neatness of the hedges, not when Eleanor raised her eyebrows over supper as Rowan nodded off over his stew, not even when Candy stole one of his boots right out of the hallway, and Rowan just sighed and hobbled after him instead of shouting. She watched him working, yes, but she didn't say anything. On Friday evening he was on his way back from collecting old hanging baskets from around town, the old hanging baskets knocking together under his arm with every step. They were lighter now, emptied of flowers and damp soil, but awkward all the same. Brittle wire scraping his sleeve, flakes of dried compost dusting his jumper. He kept his head down as he passed the baker's house next door to his. The door creaked open. "Still running errands for Mummy Barrows?" Rowan stopped. He didn't turn straight away. He knew that voice, rougher than most. When he did look back, Matthew Baker was standing in the doorway, arms folded. Molly sat at his heel. "Are they any good, those baskets?" Matthew went on, nodding toward Rowan's arm. "Or you break them like everything else you touch?" "I'm just taking them back," Rowan said, keeping his voice even. "I don't want any trouble," Matthew snorted. "Course you don't." He stepped off the threshold, boots heavy on the stone. Molly rose instantly, alert, tail giving one short wag as she watched Rowan. "Funny thing is," Matthew said, circling a little, "trouble always seems to find you." Rowan tightened his grip on the baskets. "I've got to get home." Marcus smiled without humour. He flicked 2 fingers. "Go on, Moll." Molly lunged. Her teeth caught Rowan's laces, jerking his foot out from under him. Rowan gasped, arms flailing as the baskets tipped dangerously. "Leave him," Matthew said lazily. "Not yet." Rowan stumbled backward, heel slipping on loose grit. His heart pounded so hard it made his ears ring. "Stop it," Rowan said, breathless. "Matthew, please." Matthew's grin widened. "What was that? Didn't hear you." Rowan's foot slid as he stepped back. He went down hard, the baskets flying free as his shoulder hit the ground. For a split second, everything seemed to slow. The scrape of wire, the soft rattle of dried soil breaking loose. The old basket lifted. It shouldn't have. There was no wind, no reason. But it arced neatly through the air and dropped straight down onto Matthew's head with a dull thump. Soil exploded everywhere. Matthew shouted, staggering, hands clawing at his hair as twigs and trailing roots tangled in his fingers. Dirt poured down his face and into his collar. "What the—" "Get it off!" he yelled. Molly froze. She backed away from Rowan, ears flattened, a low, frightened whine slipping from her throat. She wouldn't look at him at all. Matthew yanked at the basket, panic flashing across his face beneath the anger. "What did you do?" he snapped. "What did you do?" Rowan scrambled to his feet, chest heaving. "I didn't—" he began. Matthew lunged toward him. Rowan ran. He didn't stop until he was safely indoors, his lungs burning, the empty baskets abandoned somewhere behind him. Only then did he slow, hands shaking as he bent over, gasping for breath. Rowan had finally had enough. He was sitting at the kitchen table that evening, staring at the Hogwarts letter propped against the salt cellar. It looked faintly smug, like it knew he hadn't managed to change anything. "Mum," Rowan began. Mrs. Ashford was peeling potatoes with the brisk efficiency of someone who could probably cut glass with the edge of her tone. "Yes?" Rowan hesitated, then the words came out all at once. "Have you decided yet? About Hogwarts?" His mother set down the potato. She didn't shout. That was the worst part. "Rowan," she said very calmly, "I have watched you run yourself ragged all week, and yes, I've noticed. But this isn't about flower beds or errands. This is about whether I'm sending my only son off to a castle full of things I can't control, things your father never explained properly, things he made sound like games when they weren't." Rowan swallowed. "But I haven't decided," she said again, quiet but firm. "And wearing yourself out won't make me decide any faster." It landed like a door slamming. Rowan sat there, cheeks hot, the exhaustion of the whole week catching up to him all at once. Up in her chair by the fire, Eleanor paused in her knitting but didn't speak. Candy yawned and stretched across her lap, the only one in the room who seemed perfectly content. Rowan pushed back his chair after a moment and went upstairs without another word. Rowan slammed his bedroom door harder than he meant to. Rowan had just reached his bedroom when a soft tap sounded at the window. He turned, heart jumping, and found Sebastian perched neatly on the sill, head cocked, a familiar roll of parchment tied to his leg. "For me?" Rowan asked, already moving. Sebastian clicked his beak once and held still as Rowan untied the string. The owl accepted a scratch under the chin as payment, fluffing his feathers with dignity before hopping inside. Rowan broke the seal without sitting down. "Ro, got your last note. You sounded tired. Thought I'd write properly instead of sending a 2-line scrawl. I found something the other day while clearing a drawer and thought you might like it. Your gran used to keep everything." "Dad." A folded photograph slipped from the parchment and fluttered onto the bed. Rowan picked it up slowly. 2 boys stood in front of a towering stone building he recognised instantly, even from the grainy edges and faded colour. Hogwarts. They couldn't have been much older than he was now. One had his father's dark hair and crooked grin, robes rumpled like he'd just been dragged off a broom. The other stood straighter, eyes sharp and bright, one hand resting on the hilt of a practice sword he clearly wasn't supposed to have. Uncle Corvin. The photograph moved. Rowan's father laughed and shoved his brother's shoulder. Uncle Corvin scowled, then smirked despite himself. Rowan's chest tightened. They looked happy. Sebastian let out a low hoot, as though approving of the view. Rowan swallowed. His father had gone there. His uncle too. Downstairs, his mother's voice drifted faintly upward, calm and steady and unyielding. "I haven't decided." Rowan's fingers curled around the photograph. He didn't think, not properly. He paced the small room twice before yanking open the top drawer and grabbing a piece of parchment. Sebastian now perched on the wardrobe, golden eyes following Rowan. Rowan sat at the desk, gripping the quill too tightly as he wrote. "Dad, Mum won't let me attend Hogwarts. I've worked all week. The garden, the errands, everything. And she just keeps saying she hasn't decided. I can't wait much longer, Dad. Everyone else will have their letters by now. I thought maybe if she saw I was ready, she'd believe it. But it didn't work. She doesn't understand. Please write back. Please." He read it over once, jaw tight, then folded it sharply and tied it to Sebastian's leg before he could change his mind. "Take it to him," Rowan muttered. Sebastian clicked his beak once like a judge passing sentence, then swept out the window into the darkening sky, wings beating hard against the evening air. Rowan watched him go until the owl was only a speck against the fading light. Downstairs, voices murmured. He wasn't trying to listen, but the old house listened for you sometimes. Floorboards carrying words up like warm air. "Too hard on him," Eleanor said softly. "He is himself whether you like it or not, Margaret." "I'm scared," his mother replied, lower, raw. "Is that allowed? He's all I have. Aldrich loved that world more than this one, and look where it left us." "Loving Rowan and letting him be Rowan are not enemies," Eleanor said. "You learn to live with the magic in your house. You can learn to live with it in your son." "I don't want to lose him." "You won't," Eleanor said, firm now. "But if you try to plant him in the wrong soil, he'll wither. You know that better than anyone." Silence. Then the scrape of a chair. The kettle clicked. His shoulders felt heavy. Too heavy. He sat down on the edge of the bed, meaning to wait for Sebastian's return. But the exhaustion of the whole week, the gardening, the errands, the run-in with Matthew, the disappointment at the kitchen table, finally caught up with him. Rowan lay back without meaning to. By the time the first stars pricked through the evening sky, he was asleep, clothes and all, the letter to his father already on its way. That night, Rowan dreamed he was standing in the greenhouse. But it wasn't his mother's little glass house at all. This one stretched endlessly in every direction, a forest of vines and flowers that glowed faintly silver in the dark. Dew clung to everything, dripping in slow, heavy drops that rang like bells when they fell. He looked down and saw the Hogwarts letter resting in the soil between his feet. The parchment pulsed faintly, as though it were breathing. A whisper moved through the leaves. "Grow, Rowan." It wasn't a voice he recognised, not quite his mother's, not quite his father's, but something in between. The vines began to move, gently at first, then faster, curling up his ankles, winding around his wrists, not tight, just insistent. They shimmered faintly with light, like moonlit veins. He tried to pull free, but the plants didn't hurt him. They only held him still. Then from the far end of the glass house a shape appeared, tall, blurred, moving toward him through the mist. He thought it might be his father, but the figure's outline shifted like smoke, never quite staying the same. When it reached him, it didn't speak. It simply touched the vines, and a sound echoed through the greenhouse like wind through trees, the sound of the broken string of his father's old guitar. All the flowers turned toward him at once. "Grow, Rowan," the whisper came again, a little louder this time, a little closer. And then the vines released him, dropping away as the whole place began to crumble into light.